Imagine a world where trade barriers aren't obstacles, but secret passageways to untapped profit. Today, you'll discover how global tariffs can be flipped from a challenge to a golden opportunity, even if you've never set foot in the world of international economics. Welcome to Chapter 1. Welcome to the Tariff Tonic. Imagine receiving your monthly shipment only to discover that the cost of every single unit has suddenly spiked by 30%. No, not because you ordered extra or made a mistake, but because of an unexpected change in tariffs. It sounds like a nightmare scenario, but trust me, it doesn't have to be. Today, we're going to dismantle that nightmare and show you how to turn those startling cost surges into clear-cut opportunities for profit. This is not about abstract theories. These are hard, actionable tips that the average person can put to work the moment they notice those red flag changes in global tariffs. Let's begin with a story. Picture Carlos, a small business owner from a bustling city in South America, who imports high-quality leather goods. For years, Carlos was enjoying steady margins until one day, his suppliers informed him that tariffs on imported leather had unexpectedly jumped from 5% to nearly 15%. The sudden spike meant his costs were rising, squeezing his margins and putting his business at real risk. Instead of panicking, Carlos took action. He began renegotiating contracts with his suppliers, even considering alternative materials and new markets. Within a few months, he not only shielded his profit, but actually discovered a niche market willing to pay a premium for his rebranded, locally adapted line of products. Carlos's story is not unique. It's a wake-up call for any of us who depend on the ebb and flow of international trade. So, what can you do if you're hit with a similar spike in costs? First, keep your ear to the ground. Instead of waiting until the bill arrives, monitor tariff changes regularly through reliable sources like trade journals or government updates online. One of the simplest strategies is to set up email alerts or even subscribe to a free newsletter that highlights significant shifts in trade policy. When you're informed, you're empowered. You can compare last quarter's numbers with today's to see exactly where and how your costs are moving. When I first encountered unexpected cost spikes, I switched my approach from reactive to proactive by using these tools. Think of it as installing an early warning system for your finances. Next, review and renegotiate your supplier contracts. Here's a tip. Many contracts have clauses that allow for adjustments when tariffs change by a set percentage. Don't overlook these details. If you find your current contract lacks such a clause, use the next negotiation window to lock in a margin that accounts for potential tariff increases. In one example, a mid-sized electronics reseller in Europe managed to secure a 10% discount on bulk orders when tariffs began to rise unexpectedly. They did this by simply pushing their supplier to share a portion of the additional cost through better terms. It wasn't magic. It was solid negotiation grounded in clear market data. Another actionable tip is diversification. While sticking with a trusted supplier is comforting, putting all your eggs in one basket can be a recipe for disaster when external pressures suddenly change. Look around for alternative suppliers, both domestically and internationally. Even if it seems like switching suppliers is a monumental task, starting small by testing one product line with a new partner can provide a safety net and may even lead to better pricing or more favorable tariff conditions. I once advised a client who dealt in imported fashion accessories to diversify their product sourcing by adding one new supplier from a different region. This switch not only reduced risk, but gave them an edge when one supplier's cost surged past acceptable levels. Now, think about your pricing strategy. When unexpected costs drive up your operational expenses, a common knee-jerk reaction is to pass the cost directly onto your customers. But this isn't always the best route. Instead, consider value-based pricing. Explain to your customers the extra value they receive, even if the product now costs a bit more. Take the example of a retailer who began importing organic, sustainably sourced coffee beans. When tariffs unexpectedly increased his cost per pound by nearly 20%, he didn't simply raise his prices. Instead, he launched an educational campaign about the sustainable, high-quality process behind his beans. As a result, his loyal customer base was more than willing to pay the slight premium, turning a potential setback into a strong selling point. Also, leverage technology to your advantage. Whether you're a one-person operation or running a small team, there are countless apps and software tools that help track costs, predict market movements, and manage supply chains more efficiently. Many of these tools are surprisingly affordable and can significantly reduce the manual hassle of tracking international trade trends. By automating some of these processes, you free up time to focus on strategic decisions. One entrepreneur I spoke to saved nearly 15 hours per week by simply automating his tariff monitoring and supplier management, letting him concentrate on growth rather than firefighting. Lastly, always remember that every challenge is an invitation to innovate. Don't just see an increased tariff as a problem. See it as a chance to reevaluate and re-engineer your business model. For instance, if costs are climbing due to tariffs, consider whether it might be viable to source alternative, locally produced materials. This approach does more than mitigate cost spikes. It can create entirely new market opportunities that weren't there before. To wrap up this chapter, let me leave you with one clear, non-negotiable rule. Always be prepared to pivot. The world of global trade is full of uncertainties, and unexpected cost spikes are part of that landscape. But with proactive monitoring, intelligent supplier negotiations, diversification, smart pricing strategies, and the savvy use of technology, you can turn even the most sudden and sharp increases into a stepping stone toward lasting profit. Remember, this isn't about surviving the tariff storm. It's about learning how to ride the winds of change, transforming them into a powerful force for growth. So, tighten your grip, keep your eyes open, and get ready to turn global tariffs into your competitive advantage. Chapter 2, Tariffs 101. Picture this. You're running a small business that imports goods from overseas, and suddenly, your supplier sends you an invoice that's 20% higher than before, just because of a new tariff. It feels like you're getting squeezed from all sides, and you wonder how you can ever keep your prices competitive without sacrificing quality. This chapter is all about breaking down those tariff basics in plain language and offering real, actionable tips to tackle increased costs for imported goods and the wild ride of price volatility. The first thing to understand is that tariffs aren't some abstract economic policy designed by distant bureaucrats. They're practical and immediate influences on your bottom line. When a tariff is imposed, it acts as a tax on imports, and that tax instantly raises the cost of goods coming from abroad. If you're importing electronics, clothing, or even raw materials, this extra cost has to be absorbed somewhere, and often that means higher prices for you or your customers. The key here is not to panic, but to understand mechanics so you can strategize accordingly. Imagine a scenario where a medium-sized electronics retailer faces a sudden 15% tariff on imported components. Instead of just raising prices across the board and risking customer backlash, the management team digs deep. They decide to work closely with a new supplier in a region with more favorable tariff rates. Not only do they secure components at a lower cost, they also diversify their supplier base. This diversification isn't just smart business. It directly cushions them against the unpredictable swings of tariff policies and price volatility. One actionable tip is to always have a backup supplier. In today's global market, relying on a single overseas source is a risk you can't afford. When tariffs spike, having a second supplier gives you leverage to negotiate better terms. And it can also mean the difference between maintaining your profit margins and suffering a serious setback. It might feel like extra work up front, but that foresight can save you serious headaches down the line. Now, let's talk about price volatility. When tariffs are introduced, they often don't stick around in a predictable, static number. Instead, they fluctuate as governments adjust policies in response to economic conditions. Price volatility can erode confidence, both yours and your customers. Imagine ordering 1,000 units of your best-selling product, only to see the landed cost jump again due to a policy change. It's not just a matter of higher expenses. It creates chaos in inventory planning and can lead to overstocking or stockouts, both of which hurt your cash flow. A vivid, realistic scenario involves a small import-export business in the consumer goods sector. Last year, their costs suddenly spiked by 10% overnight because of a new tariff on imported plastic components. Instead of passively accepting this outcome, they took proactive measures. They began tracking tariff changes on a weekly basis, using a combination of industry newsletters, government publications, and even social media updates from trade experts. By monitoring these changes closely, they were able to forecast price changes better and adjust their pricing strategies accordingly. The takeaway? Always plan for fluctuations by building a flexible strategy. Instead of locking in rigid pricing, consider dynamic pricing models that allow you to absorb cost changes in real time. Another crucial tip is to rework your supply chain. If tariffs are making your imported components more expensive, look at your whole chain of value. Sometimes the solution isn't just a search for a cheaper supplier, but to innovate your entire process. For instance, a well-known toy manufacturer experienced this firsthand when tariffs drove up the cost of plastic. They invested in local manufacturing alternatives and re-engineered their products to use less plastic. Over time, this not only reduced their reliance on imports, but also gave them an edge in marketing products as locally adapted and sustainable. While this change might require upfront investment, the long-term savings and improved brand image can be substantial. To make these strategies actionable, here are 3 concrete steps any business or aspiring entrepreneur can start implementing right away. Diversify your supplier network. Make it a habit to research and maintain relationships with multiple suppliers from different regions. Schedule quarterly reviews of your supplier list to ensure you're not overly reliant on one country or region that might be affected by sudden tariff hikes. This proactive approach builds resilience into your business model. Invest in monitoring tools. Don't rely solely on sporadic internet searches for tariff updates. Invest in specialized software or subscriptions that track global trade policies in real time. Even a basic spreadsheet updated weekly with the latest figures from your trusted sources will give you a clearer picture of where costs might be headed. When you have accurate data, you're better prepared to adjust your business decisions on the fly. Reassess your value chain. Regularly evaluate every step of your production and distribution process. Look for opportunities to reduce the parts of your supply chain that are most vulnerable to tariff changes. This might mean shifting some operations domestically or even rethinking product designs to use alternative materials that aren't subject to tariffs. Small tweaks can lead to significant savings over time. Let's dive a bit into a personal anecdote that illustrates the importance of these steps. Consider a fictional but realistic case study of a small furniture retailer. This retailer had been importing exotic woods from overseas to produce custom furniture. Suddenly, tariffs surged and their import costs skyrocketed. Instead of passing the entire cost onto their customers and risking a drop in sales, they took a 2-pronged approach. First, they diversified their supplier pool by sourcing a portion of the wood from local suppliers who could provide similar quality at a slightly different price point. Second, they started a weekly review session where the management team tracked not only tariff changes, but also looked into alternative materials that could mimic the exotic look without the extra cost. As a result, they managed to reduce their increased expenses by nearly 8% within months. Their story is a powerful reminder that while tariffs are an uncontrollable external factor, your response is entirely within your control. In the end, understanding tariffs isn't about getting bogged down in numbers and complicated policies. It's about recognizing how these changes impact your everyday operations and having clear, actionable strategies to adapt. Each time the government announces a new tariff, view it not as a roadblock, but as a challenge that can catalyze smarter business practices. Instead of succumbing to increased costs and price volatility, see these forces as opportunities to sharpen your competitive edge. Chapter 3. The Global Canvas. Tariffs Around the World. In this chapter, the narrative takes us on a journey across continents, uncovering how tariffs shape global trade, and more importantly, how everyday businesses and individuals can use these regulatory twists to their advantage. This is not a dry academic lecture. This is a real-world exploration of actionable strategies backed by real-life stories and hard numbers that cut through the jargon. Imagine a small artisan in Mexico who once struggled to break into the American market because of steep tariffs imposed on imported handmade goods. Facing higher costs and fewer sales, this entrepreneur could have easily folded, but instead, he retooled his business model. By shifting his focus to locally sourced materials, He avoided the heavy tariffs and even attracted a premium customer segment that valued authenticity and sustainability. His sales grew by 25% within a year, not because he lowered his standards, but because he adapted to the global economic climate. This story is a prime example of how understanding international tariff policies can turn a challenge into a lucrative opportunity. For many, the pain point lies in feeling overwhelmed by the seemingly arbitrary and complex world of international trade. Tariffs, after all, are often seen as the enemy. Barriers stand in the way of smoother and more profitable transactions. But when examined closely, tariffs are predictable tools. They are policy instruments designed to protect local industries or raise government revenue, and that means they follow certain patterns that can be anticipated. Take the example of a mid-sized electronics manufacturer in South Korea. In 2018, when the United States decided to impose additional tariffs on certain technology components, this company was forced to look for alternatives. Instead of scrambling in panic, the leadership team analyzed the tariff trends, sought advice from local trade experts, and quickly shifted part of their production overseas to countries where tariffs were less burdensome. The result? They saved over $1.2 million in costs over 2 years. Such strategic moves underscore the importance of not only understanding the tariff landscape, but also mapping out exactly how these policies impact the bottom line. The key takeaway for listeners is to see tariffs not as insurmountable walls, but as predictable waves in the ocean of global trade. Waves you can learn to ride. One concrete tip is to start with market research focused specifically on tariff changes. For instance, businesses can subscribe to updates from major trade news outlets or government websites, which often announce tariff changes months in advance. This proactive approach allows companies to plan logistics, renegotiate supply contracts, and even redesign products to sidestep the higher costs associated with tariffs. It's about developing a forward-thinking mindset where you continuously watch for regulatory trends and position yourself ahead of the curve. Another practical piece of advice comes from the experience of family-owned furniture business in Italy. With rising tariffs making imported components prohibitively expensive, the owners decided to invest in local craftsmanship and raw materials. They created a distinctive line of made-in-Italy furniture that not only avoided the tariff pitfalls, but also commanded a higher price tag due to its quality and uniqueness. Their revenue increased by 40% within the first year after the pivot. This story is about luck. It's about the deliberate choice to reorient the business in response to changing trade policies, transforming what appeared to be a burden into a competitive strength. Listeners should also note the importance of partnerships and networking in this global landscape. Relationships with local suppliers, trade associations, and even competitors can provide critical insights and collaborative opportunities. For instance, a mid-sized agricultural co-op in Brazil capitalized on this by creating a regional alliance to share resources and knowledge about exporting goods. Instead of facing tariffs alone, they pooled their shipments and negotiated as a larger entity, reducing shipping and customs costs significantly. This alliance also opened doors to training and best practice seminars, which further solidified their market position. The lesson here is clear. In a tariff world, collaboration can be just as valuable as innovation. The narrative of this chapter also weaves in the story of an emerging tech startup in India. The founders were initially discouraged by the steep tariffs on imported microchips, which were integral to their prototype devices. Instead of viewing these tariffs as a dead end, they investigated local alternatives and invested in developing homegrown components. Within 2 years, what started as a cost-saving experiment evolved into an innovative product line that was entirely developed in India. The startup not only slashed its production expenses by nearly 30%, but also garnered government support due to its contribution to local innovation and employment. Such stories remind listeners that sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come from turning restrictions into opportunities for reinvention. For those listening who are wondering how to begin turning these insights into action, the advice is simple. First, reassess your current supply chain to identify components or processes most affected by tariffs. Use this information to explore local alternatives or partnerships. Next, implement a robust monitoring system for global trade news. This might include setting up alerts for tariff changes, regularly consulting trade journals, or even hiring a consultant for a one-time audit of potential risks and opportunities. Don't wait until a crisis hits. Be proactive and plan for multiple scenarios. It might also mean experimenting with pilot projects to test the feasibility of local sourcing or alternative routes for importation. What you want to create is a dynamic response strategy, a living document that evolves as global trade policies do. It's crucial to keep an eye on the numbers. Real actions are measured in cost savings, additional revenue, and increased market share. For instance, consider the case of a consumer electronics retailer in Australia. After detailed analysis, they restructured their import strategy to shift toward suppliers in Southeast Asia, where tariffs were lower. Within a single fiscal year, they reported a 15% reduction in costs and improved their pricing flexibility significantly. Such quantifiable successes are the benchmarks that prove the value of adaptive strategies. Ultimately, what this global canvas reveals is that tariffs are not just abstract figures in government reports. They are concrete factors that affect everyday business decisions. By turning challenges into opportunities, even small players can find substantial profit margins in what might seem to be a hostile environment. Through meticulous research, strategic planning, and a collaborative approach, anyone can navigate the maze of global tariffs and come out ahead. Chapter 4. Unconventional Profit. Spotting the Opportunities. Tariffs are often painted as roadblocks, sharp, jagged barriers that choke supply chains, inflate prices, and stifle innovation. But to the trained eye, tariffs aren't walls. They're windows into untapped opportunities. The trick is learning where to look. Let's start with a story. In 2018, when the U.S. imposed hefty tariffs on Chinese imports, a small fitness equipment company called Peak Performance was on the verge of collapse. Their best-selling product, a $250 adjustable dumbbell set, was suddenly slapped with a 25% tariff. The immediate result? Their profit margin was obliterated overnight. But instead of throwing in the towel, they got creative. First, they analyzed their supply chain. Where were the parts sourced? Could they make substitutions? They discovered that the steel for the weights accounted for over 60% of the production cost. By shifting to a domestic supplier in Canada, a country exempt from the tariff, they reduced costs by 15%. Next, they looked at their product design. Could it be simplified? They swapped the traditional chrome finish for a durable powder coating, cutting manufacturing time in half. Finally, they raised prices by 10% but marketed it as a premium product with North American craftsmanship. By year's end, Peak Performance not only survived but thrived, reporting a 12% increase in revenue. Their competitors? Most didn't adapt and were either swallowed by larger firms or disappeared entirely. So what does this tell us? Success in the tariff world isn't about brute force. It's about finesse. And here's how you can do it too. 1. Map the ripple effects. When a tariff hits, it sends ripples through the market. Prices shift, competitors falter, and gaps emerge. Your first task is to map these ripples. Which industries are directly affected? And more importantly, which ones are indirectly impacted? Let's take a real-world example. When tariffs on Chinese solar panels went into effect, the obvious losers were solar panel manufacturers. But guess who won? U.S.-based installers. With fewer panels flooding the market, domestic companies suddenly had less competition and could charge higher prices. To map these effects, follow the supply chain. Look upstream, who supplies the raw materials, and downstream, who depends on the final product. Tools like import, export databases, and government trade reports are gold mines for this kind of analysis. 2. Look for the underserved. Every tariff creates a vacuum. Somewhere, someone is struggling to find a product or service they used to take for granted. Your job is to step into that gap. Take the story of Fresh Earth Foods, a small importer of specialty Italian olive oils. When tariffs made European imports pricier, they pivoted. Instead of importing finished olive oil, they sourced raw olives from Greece, where tariffs were lower, and partnered with local U.S. press to produce their oil domestically. The result? They not only bypassed the tariffs, but marketed their product as freshly pressed in America, appealing to the growing demand for locally sourced goods. The key is to identify niches where demand is strong, but supply has faltered. Use customer surveys, online forums, and even social media complaints to pinpoint where people feel the pinch. 3. Reverse engineer success. If you're not sure where to start, look at who's already winning. When tariffs hit, some businesses inevitably find ways to adapt faster than others. Study them. What are they doing differently? Take, for example, a mid-size electronics brand during the 2021 semiconductor shortage. While many companies panicked, this brand thrived by doubling down on refurbishments. They sourced used components from domestic recyclers, retrofitted older models, and sold them at competitive prices. By the time their competitors figured out how to cope, they'd gained a significant market share. 4. Test before you leap. Jumping into a tariff market without a plan is like stepping into quicksand. Before committing resources, test your ideas on a small scale. One entrepreneur, Miguel, did just that. After hearing about the U.S.-China trade war, he realized there might be an opportunity in luxury dog beds, an industry heavily reliant on Chinese imports. Instead of ordering 1,000 units up front, he made 50 prototypes using locally sourced materials. He listed them on Etsy, testing different price points and marketing angles. Within 3 months, he had enough data to scale up. Testing doesn't just mitigate risk, it sharpens your strategy. Start small, measure everything, and iterate quickly. 5. Play the long game. In a tariff world, patience is a virtue. Many businesses panic, try to recoup losses immediately. But the most successful players think long-term. Take the example of an agricultural startup that faced soaring costs for imported fertilizers. Instead of scrambling to find alternative suppliers, they invested in R&D to develop a new, organic fertilizer using local algae. The transition took 2 years, but today, they not only dominate their niche, but enjoy the added benefit of being labeled eco-friendly. Sometimes, the best opportunities aren't immediate. Look for trends, invest in sustainable solutions, and position yourself for future gains. 6. Leverage partnerships. If tariffs are squeezing you, they're probably squeezing someone else too. Collaboration can be a powerful tool. A real estate developer in Texas, for example, faced skyrocketing costs for imported steel beams. Instead of absorbing the blow, they partnered with a local steel manufacturer to co-develop a new alloy. The manufacturer gained a steady customer, and the developer secured a lower price. Think about who shares your pain points and explore ways to share the burden or the rewards. 7. Tell the right story. Finally, never underestimate the power of a good story. Tariffs may raise your costs, but they also give you a chance to differentiate your brand. Consider the case of a boutique chocolate maker in California. When cocoa tariffs drove up prices, they embraced transparency. Their packaging now includes a breakdown of their costs, showing customers exactly how much goes to farmers, transportation, and tariffs. Customers responded with overwhelming support, appreciating the honesty and feeling part of the journey. Your story can be your greatest asset. Use it to connect with customers and turn a challenge into a badge of honor. Tariffs aren't going away. They're an inevitable part of global trade, as constant as the tides. But like the tides, they can be navigated. With creativity, adaptability, and a willingness to think outside the box, you can turn global tariffs from obstacles into stepping stones. Because here's the truth. Someone will profit in a tariff world. Why shouldn't it be you? Chapter 5. Strategy and Action. In this chapter, the narrative unfolds around real, actionable strategies that transform the challenges posed by tariffs into concrete business opportunities. Listeners will hear about practical steps that seasoned entrepreneurs have taken, step-by-step insights that make sense in the everyday world of commerce, and a no-nonsense approach that cuts through uncertainty. Consider the story of Martin, a mid-size importer from the Midwest who found his business facing an abrupt tariff increase that threatened to erode his profit margins by 15%. Instead of succumbing to frustration, Martin took a hard look at his cost structures and supply chains, determined to reverse the impact. His first step was a methodical cost breakdown. He itemized each expense connected to import fees and identified where efficiencies could be squeezed. By renegotiating terms with suppliers and exploring alternate sourcing options, Martin managed to reduce his operating costs by nearly 8% over 6 months. His story isn't one of luck. It's a blueprint for anyone who finds themselves in a similar pinch. Listeners learn from Martin's approach that success starts with a clear, critical view of one's numbers. The first actionable tip in a tariff world is to perform a rigorous audit of the business's entire cost framework. This means taking a hard look at everything from raw material costs to shipping fees. In a world where tariffs can spike unexpectedly, having a detailed understanding of each cost element isn't optional. It's essential. Business owners should ask themselves, where can I cut costs without sacrificing quality? And which processes can be streamlined? This rigorous analysis often reveals that seemingly inescapable costs can be mitigated with smart negotiations or by shifting to alternative suppliers. Another real-life example comes from Jenna, a small-scale electronics retailer in the Pacific Northwest. Facing a 10% tariff on several components she relied on, Jenna opted to switch gears. Instead of absorbing the increased cost, she adapted by localizing her supply chain. Jenna forged partnerships with regional manufacturers to source alternative materials and components that had lower associated tariff risks. The pivot wasn't instantaneous. It was a result of months of careful market research and negotiation. Yet, her willingness to take calculated risks paid off. Within a year, her profit margins not only recovered but eventually grew by 12%, even as tariffs continue to fluctuate. Jenna's journey emphasizes that adaptability and proximity in the supply chain can be a powerful counter to unpredictable regulatory changes. Listeners need to recognize that these strategies are more than just theories. They're the result of deliberate, strategic moves that directly address the pain points experienced by business owners: rising costs, supply chain volatility, and pricing pressures. Another actionable tactic is to focus on value addition. Businesses that only rely on importation can dramatically improve their bottom line by adding local value. For example, a furniture company might import raw materials and then add a unique design or customization step locally, transforming a standard product into a premium offering that can command higher prices. The key here is to not remain static. Instead, transform the core product or service in a way that the tariff burden is diluted by the added value. In this narrative, there's also the story of Aaron, who runs a boutique clothing brand in a competitive market. His company relied heavily on imported textiles until a sudden 12% tariff drove a wedge between production costs and consumer prices. Rather than simply raising prices and risking customer loss, Aaron reimagined his business model. He diversified his offerings by incorporating locally sourced elements and emphasizing craftsmanship unique to his region. By branding these locally sourced products as limited editions, he tapped into a niche market willing to pay a premium. Within 18 months, Aaron's revenue increased by 20% as his brand became synonymous with quality and regional authenticity. His experience reinforces a critical takeaway. Focusing on niche markets and brand storytelling can offset the negative impact of tariffs. For any entrepreneur today, these examples offer clear, actionable lessons. Begin by reassessing your supply chain. Look for vulnerabilities that could be exacerbated by sudden regulatory changes. Explore alternatives that include local sourcing or even forming coalitions with other small businesses to leverage bulk discounts. It is also essential to invest in market research. In the tariff world, knowledge isn't just power, it's profit. Keeping an eye on international policy shifts and market trends enables businesses to pivot faster than those who remain complacent. Listeners should set up regular review processes where they analyze industry reports, monitor political developments affecting trade, and even consult with trade experts. Alongside these strategies comes the critical habit of financial forecasting under uncertainty. Business leaders should develop scenarios that account for various tariff conditions, from minimal increases to the worst-case heavy tariffs. This not only aids in budgeting, but also instills a discipline of preparedness. It's much like riding out a storm with a well-crafted plan. When the winds change, you're not caught off guard. The actionable tip here is clear. Incorporate contingency planning into every financial forecast, ensuring the company can weather even the harshest tariff-induced storms. Another tangible piece of advice can be drawn from strategy sessions that involve the entire team, not just the upper management. When everyone in a company understands the challenge and the tactical response, the result is a unified, agile response that is far more effective. Martin's team, for instance, held weekly review meetings where they tracked cost-saving measures and brainstormed adjustments to the shifting cost dynamics. This practice not only improved morale, but also continuously generated creative ideas for bypassing tariff pitfalls. Regular team huddles and open forums for discussion are practices that any business can implement immediately, regardless of size. In the end, the story of these businesses isn't just a tale of survival. It's one of reinvention and growth. What listeners take away from this chapter is a concrete set of tactics. Audit your costs rigorously. Diversify your supply chains. Add local value. Focus on niche branding. Prepare for multiple scenarios, and cultivate a culture of innovation and communication within your organization. These aren't abstract strategies. They are proven, actionable steps that have helped real businesses not only to survive tariff hikes, but to thrive in spite of them. Chapter 6. Navigating Risks. Navigating risks in the tariff world isn't about dodging obstacles. It's about learning to steer through them with confidence and skill. In a busy manufacturing district in Ohio, there was once an entrepreneur named Daniel who ran a mid-sized electronics parts business. When new tariffs began to squeeze the supply chain in 2018, his company's profits took an immediate hit. Daniel's story isn't extraordinary in its challenges, but offers a clear example of how calculated risk management can transform a crisis into an opportunity for sustainable growth. His first move was to sit down with his key team members and map out every potential risk that could derail their operations. They identified 3 main pain points: skyrocketing costs of imported materials, sudden changes in market demand, and an over-reliance on a small circle of suppliers. These weren't vague threats. They were immediate pressures that were eating into margins by as much as 15% over a single quarter. Daniel's first actionable tip was to establish safety nets. He set aside an emergency fund that equaled 3 months of operating expenses. No small feat to put in perspective. This wasn't just about saving money. It was about creating a buffer that allowed his team to experiment with alternative suppliers without the constant fear of insolvency. For instance, when one of his primary suppliers announced a 25% price hike on a critical component, Daniel was able to switch over to a partner in Southeast Asia, thanks to the funds he had prudently reserved. In this way, he turned an immediate threat into a stepping stone for a more diversified and resilient supply chain. Another key aspect of Daniel's risk management was continuous monitoring of regulatory changes. Every week, he would review updates from trade journals, government releases, and international market reports. This wasn't a passive habit, but an essential part of his business routine. By staying on top of emerging tariff policies, he could anticipate market shifts and make preemptive adjustments. For example, when news broke about potential new tariffs on semiconductor imports, Daniel immediately convened a team meeting to map out a contingency plan, ranging from alternative components to renegotiating contracts with existing suppliers. His message was clear. Waiting until the storm hit wasn't an option. This mindset of constant vigilance helped him avoid the pitfalls that caught many others off guard. In his quest to fortify his business, Daniel began an initiative called Supplier Diversification Day. Every quarter, he would invite potential suppliers from different regions to pitch their capabilities. On one such day, a supplier from Eastern Europe showcased a prototype component that was not only cheaper by 10%, but also of higher quality than what Daniel had been sourcing. The strategic move to onboard this new partner mitigated the risk of over-reliance on a single supply source, ensuring that if tariffs impacted one region, his business wouldn't collapse. His diversification strategy not only smoothed out supply chain volatility, but also opened avenues for negotiating better deals by creating a competitive bidding environment among suppliers. A particularly memorable moment for Daniel came during a market downturn in early 2019. With tariffs escalating unpredictably, many businesses in his network were scrambling to contain losses. Daniel, however, had the foresight to invest in automation technology that streamlined production processes and reduced overall costs by approximately 8%. It wasn't a flashy move, but it paid off handsomely when the market conditions worsened. The capital he had redirected towards efficiency improvements served as an insurance policy, helping his company maintain positive cash flow when competitors struggled. This decision was based on the principle that risk management isn't only reactive, It's about building a resilient business model before the crisis hits. As word of Daniel's tactics spread among his peers, he became known for his 5 smart moves approach to navigating tariff risks. The first move was to always keep a finger on the pulse of global trade trends by dedicating at least a couple of hours each week to reading updates and reports. The second was to diversify suppliers to avoid vulnerability from regional shocks. The third move involved negotiating long-term contracts with fixed pricing where possible. This tactic, while it didn't eliminate risk entirely, provided a degree of predictability in an otherwise unstable environment. The fourth move was to invest in technology that reduced waste and increased operational efficiency. And finally, the fifth move was to maintain open, honest communication with both suppliers and customers about potential price adjustments due to regulatory changes. These were not abstract principles, but rules that Daniel followed rigorously, and they contributed to a significant turnaround. His company's profit margins improved by nearly 12% over the following year. One cannot overstate the importance of transparency in risk management. Daniel made it a point to share the challenges and strategies with his employees on a regular basis, turning the daunting concept of tariffs into a shared puzzle for the entire team to solve. This approach not only fostered a culture of collaboration, but also ensured that everyone from the warehouse floor to the executive suite was aligned. When employees saw that their ideas could contribute to a strategic pivot, even an intern suggested a minor tweak in the inventory system that eventually saved the company an estimated $50,000 in annual losses. These small victories, when compounded, paved the way for a resilient business model that could weather the storm of global tariffs. Daniel's story also highlights the importance of scenario planning, considering the worst-case scenarios and preparing for them. During one particularly volatile period, he organized a simulated crisis day, where the entire team mapped out responses to a hypothetical 30% tariff increase across multiple product lines. They drilled through the scenarios step by step, identify which processes would be affected, which suppliers could be contacted immediately, and how the marketing team could communicate potential delays to customers. This exercise wasn't just theoretical. It provided clear, actionable steps that could be activated at a moment's notice. The preparedness paid off when, just months later, a sudden policy shift forced several competitors to scramble for solutions. Daniel's team, already having rehearsed their responses, managed to implement their contingency plans with little disruption, minimizing losses and even capitalizing on market opportunities. Throughout his journey, Daniel learned that managing risk in the tariff world isn't about being overly cautious or paralyzed by fear. It's about being proactive, planning for disruption, investing in diversifications, and always looking for the silver lining amid adversity. His advice to others was simple yet powerful. Don't wait for the risk to become a crisis. Anticipate it, plan for it, and then act on it. This principle resonated with many who were facing similar challenges, and his methods were increasingly adopted by businesses of all sizes. Chapter 7. The Innovation Engine, Adapting and Evolving. When the winds of change blow through an economy, it is not the strongest that survive, but those who can pivot with precision. In today's tariff world, every challenge carries within it the seed of opportunity. Take the case of Luis, a middle-aged entrepreneur from Milwaukee who spent years in the auto parts business. When tariffs on imported raw materials shot up overnight, many in his industry panicked. Instead of folding, Luis rethought every facet of the production line. He realized that innovation wasn't reserved for high-tech startups. It was for anyone with a clear vision and determination to adapt. Luis's breakthrough came when he decided to source alternative materials from local suppliers, saving his company nearly 20% on costs, while also cutting supply chain risks by half. It wasn't magic. It was simply a matter of asking the right questions and being ready to experiment with unconventional ideas. For those who face the day-to-day grind of unpredictable tariffs eroding profit margins, the first lesson is simple. Stop treating tariffs as a static problem. They are dynamic forces that, when understood, can reshape an entire business strategy. One actionable tip is to develop a flexible cost model that includes tariff buffers in pricing. Think of it like having an emergency fund, but instead, you're budgeting for regulatory changes. If a product's cost unexpectedly increases by 15% due to a new tariff, having a clear contingency plan allows a business to adjust without jeopardizing an entire operation. Luis's strategy wasn't built on abstract theories. It was informed by real numbers. He started by mapping his supply chain and identifying which components were most vulnerable to tariff fluctuations. By renegotiating contracts with local suppliers and even investing in a small manufacturing unit, he managed to bring costs down by over 18% within the first year. His innovation wasn't just in technology, but in attitude, questioning old assumptions and being prepared to make hard decisions. One of the most common pain points for businesses and individuals alike is the fear of change. Many worry that adapting to tariffs will mean a complete overhaul of their current business model. But the truth is, innovation can be incremental. A practical approach is to start small. Imagine a baker who suddenly faces a steep tariff on imported chocolate. Instead of immediately overhauling his entire menu, he might experiment with locally sourced cocoa alternatives and gradually introduce new recipes. Over the course of several months, he not only manages to retain his loyal customers, but also attract a new audience interested in supporting locally produced goods. The key milestone here is the first sale of a new product line, an event that signals a successful adaptation and builds momentum for further innovation. Another specific tip is to invest in market research aimed at understanding tariff trends. A lot of businesses make the mistake of ignoring emerging signals from policymakers until it's too late. By subscribing to a reliable news feed, joining industry groups, or even attending local seminars on global trade, business owners can get ahead of the curve. Think of it as having a radar that constantly scans the horizon for changes. And when that radar picks up a signal, a policy change here, a global shift there, the business can prepare, reallocate resources, or pivot strategies accordingly. Innovation also means embracing technology, even for those traditionally operating in low-tech environments. Consider Sarah, a third-generation textile producer in North Carolina. Faced with rising costs due to imported fabric tariffs, Sarah invested in automation to enhance efficiency. Within 6 months, she reported a 25% increase in productivity and reduced waste by 30%, all while maintaining the quality her customers expected. Her story underlines a powerful lesson. Technological upgrades, when done thoughtfully, are not luxuries. They are necessities in a world where tariffs can upend market conditions overnight. Businesses don't have to go digital overnight. They simply need to identify one area where automation or data analytics can reduce costs and improve flexibility. The narrative of adaptation also involves learning from failure. Not every innovation is a home run. There was a case of a small electronics distributor in Texas who attempted to hedge against tariffs by diversifying his product range. The move backfired because he spread his resources too thin, losing focus on his core competencies. What can be learned here? Focus and measured risk-taking are crucial. When testing a new idea, it helps to do it on a small scale, a pilot program that doesn't fully commit the company's entire operational framework. This approach minimizes risk, provides actionable feedback, and paves the way for a measured rollout if the initial tests prove successful. Every adaptation journey has its milestones. For instance, consider the first positive feedback from a customer after a price adjustment or the moment a revised supply chain starts showing better margins. These are the moments that keep the spirit of innovation alive. It's not about overnight miracles. It's about steadily building a more resilient business model. Real innovation, as exemplified by Luis, Sarah, and many unsung heroes in diverse industries, is about calculating the risk, embracing incremental change, and learning continuously from both success and missteps. One effective method to systematize innovation is the regular innovation audit. This is a scheduled review, perhaps quarterly, where the business assesses its processes and strategies against current market conditions. During an audit, managers can review their supply chain, pricing structures, and even marketing strategies, ensuring they're aligned with the latest tariff realities. This practice can be as simple as setting aside a half-day retreat where key team members discuss what's working and what's not, and then set concrete, actionable goals for the coming quarter. By institutionalizing this practice, businesses create a culture where adaptation is not just a reaction, but a strategic priority. The beauty of these techniques is that they don't require major capital investments or a complete business overhaul. Instead, They call for a disciplined approach to change management and a willingness to confront painful truths. If a business continues to operate under the assumption that the current model will hold indefinitely, then it is already on the road to stagnation. Instead, embracing a mindset where every challenge is seen as an opportunity to innovate can be a game changer. For the everyday entrepreneur or small business owner, the narrative is clear. Adaptation is a continuous process. It might start with changing a supplier here or automating a process there, but over time, these small changes add up. The cumulative effect is a resilient business model that can weather any external shock, be it a sudden tariff hike or a market downturn. Chapter 8. Your Roadmap to Lasting Profit. In the grand tapestry of turning challenges into gold, the roadmap to lasting profit is less about luck and more about methodical, actionable steps. This chapter lays out a straightforward guide, as if spoken by a mentor walking beside someone on a long journey through everyday challenges and victories. The narrative centers on the experiences of those who have grappled with tariff-related obstacles head-on, leveraging them into opportunities that turn their fortunes around. Consider the story of Alex, a small-scale importer who saw a global tariff shake his traditional business model. Instead of capitulating to increase costs, Alex re-examined his product line, looking for creative ways to substitute expensive imported goods with locally sourced alternatives. With a keen eye on everyday figures and metrics, he discovered that switching to suppliers from regions with lower tariffs trimmed his expenses by nearly 20% over 6 months. Alex's experience demonstrates that by carefully tracking costs and adjusting strategies on a micro level, one can not only survive in a tariff-heavy market, but thrive by creating a niche that competitors ignored. The roadmap to lasting profit begins with 3 distinct, actionable phases: reevaluation, strategic pivoting, and execution with continual refinement. In the first phase, reevaluation, one must take a cold, clear look at existing costs. For many, the pain point lies in the hidden impact of tariffs on margins, which often go unnoticed until they start to erode earnings. Just as Alex did, a business must scrutinize every expense line, turning its focus to where tariffs force a break in the supply chain or inflate the cost of goods. This isn't an abstract exercise. It's about facing the numbers head-on. Instead of viewing the tariff as a monolithic challenge, break it down. Identify which imported components are truly essential and which can be substituted or even eliminated. In many cases, the numbers are startling. Costs that initially seem manageable can balloon into the main barrier against profitability if left unchecked. Once a comprehensive reevaluation is complete, the next step is strategic pivoting. This phase is where the rubber meets the road, where ideas take shape and plans are forged from detailed insights. Picture a local manufacturer, Maya's Artisan Goods, where Maya herself recognized that rising tariffs on imported materials put an unsustainable strain on her budget. Instead of reducing quality or increasing prices, Maya sourced alternative materials that were produced within tariff-free zones. It was a decision that not only preserved her profit margins, but also appealed to a growing segment of her customers, those who valued locally made goods. This strategic pivot was about more than cost savings. It was a deliberate move to tap into consumer desire for authenticity and local craftsmanship. The lesson here is clear. When challenged by external economic forces, look for the pivot points where change can lead to innovation. The key isn't to resist change or wait for conditions to improve. It's to embrace a proactive shift that aligns your operations with new realities. Execution with continual refinement is the third phase of the roadmap. This is where theory becomes practice, and the relentless pursuit of improvement sets a successful venture apart from those that are mired in inertia. Many business owners, like the determined operator behind a modest online retail store, Sam, have learned the hard way that initial success is merely the beginning. In Sam's case, the initial strategy to reroute supply chains was only the first step. He tracked every adjustment, every fluctuation in costs, and every shift in market behavior. Using simple, actionable metrics, profit margins, customer feedback, and inventory turnover, Sam constantly refined his approach. Every quarter, he reviewed the data, making micro-adjustments that ensured his business stayed agile. This rigorous, numbers-driven approach allowed him to maintain healthy profit margins even as the regulatory landscape continued to evolve. Each of these phases is underscored by one clear truth. Lasting profit in a tariff world is rooted in action, measurable results, and continuous learning. Imagine a road map marked not by vague aspirations, but by milestones that can be tracked and measured. One milestone might be achieving a 10% reduction in costs through local sourcing. Another might be capturing a new segment of the market by repositioning a product as locally produced. These aren't lofty goals. They are grounded in real-world numbers that matter to every business owner. The narrative isn't about theoretical models. It's about the tangible benefits reaped by those who dare to innovate. For those listening, the challenge is personal too. Many have felt the sting of rising prices, the frustration of shrinking margins, or the anxiety of uncertain economic climates. The roadmap, however, is designed to address these pain points directly with clear, actionable steps. It asks the listener to consider, which part of my business is most vulnerable to tariff-induced cost increases, and what immediate changes can I implement to mitigate these risks? The advice is unvarnished. Measure every expense, reevaluate supply options, and pivot quickly when new opportunities reveal themselves. It's a call to action that moves away from passivity and toward a hands-on, data-driven approach. One common experience shared by entrepreneurs in similar scenarios is the critical moment of decision-making when a tariff hike is announced. Rather than waiting for the situation to worsen, successful individuals see that as the starting gun for transformation. They analyze their data, consult with suppliers, and sometimes even reorganize entire departments to handle the new reality. The narrative weaves through multiple case studies, highlighting how a clear head and methodical approach can transform an existential threat into a profit-making engine. In some cases, the transformation was so successful that businesses recorded profit increases of up to 15% simply by shifting focus and eliminating unnecessary cost burdens. The conversation around tariffs and profit isn't an abstract economic theory. It's the day-to-day reality for small business owners, retail managers, and even independent entrepreneurs who operate on razor-thin margins. The real-life stories underscore that success isn't about complex financial wizardry. It's about applying common sense and diligence. It's about regular reviews of supplier contracts, staying updated on regional trade policies, and being nimble enough to make quick decisions when the market shifts. The process might sound methodical, but it is, in essence, the art of turning everyday challenges into stepping stones for success. Moreover, the roadmap is not rigid. It encourages the listener to develop a personalized approach that fits the unique contours of their business environment. For example, while Alex might have found local sourcing the ultimate solution, another entrepreneur might discover that forming a cooperative with other small businesses to aggregate demand can lead to better pricing and lower tariffs collectively. The key takeaway is that there are multiple pathways to the same destination, lasting profit. The listener is invited to experiment, track the outcomes, and adjust accordingly.